Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Tehillim Treasures, where we go through the entirety of Sefer Tehillim from the beginning till the very end, the timeless words of David HaMelech giving Chazaq to everyone in Klal Yisrael. This episode is sponsored by Chazaq, who provides after-school programming and Sunday programming for over 15 different locations throughout the New York area. And they are helping children go to yeshiva. They have a special division called Public Schools to Yeshiva, PSTY program that has been very, very successful in transforming the lives of countless Yiddish Kinderlich. If you know anyone that is in need, please let us know. You can join helping the over 1,200 children who have benefited from this program. The number is 718-285-9132 or psty@chazaq.org. This evening's episode is sponsored by chickensforshabbos.com, where chickensforshabbos.com is helping many families of grushas, agunas, and melamdim who cannot afford basic needs. Try to imagine for a moment not having the necessary funds to be able to pay for your basic needs. Please help them at chickensforshabbos.com. Your dollar will go a long, long way. In this episode, we will go through Kapitel Samach Hey and Kapitel Samach Vav as we continue our march through Sefer Tehillim. Lamnatseach Mizmor LeDavid Shir. David HaMelech, right now in this kapitel, he's reflecting on the place where the Beis HaMikdash is going to be built. Praises to the one to whom you choose and draw near to dwell in your courts. Although the place was desolate at the time, there is no Beis HaMikdash that has yet to be built, as David HaMelech composes this kapitel. David HaMelech saw what others would never be able to see. David HaMelech sees in the Churban, one day there will be binyan, there will be a building built, there will be a palace built, there will be the home of Hashem and the Beis HaMikdash built there. And sometimes you look at a barren field. Every once in a while I drive in an area and I always marvel at the people that are able to see in a forest or in a barren land. They're able to see developments, and you drive by there a few years later and you're able to see, wow, these developers really had vision. Nobody had greater vision than David HaMelech. David HaMelech didn't just see real estate development. He didn't just see apartment buildings and office buildings. He saw a Beis HaMikdash where otherwise everyone else would have seen utter desolation. There's a story that's told. It was in World War II, and Reb David Soloveitchik, who at the time was young Meshulam David Soloveitchik, was afraid for his life. And one night, a family friend shared with him a thought. It happens to be that when I visited Reb David Soloveitchik, I had seen him recount this story in his sefer, and I shared with him that I remembered this Maisa, and he had tremendous hana from me retelling the story to him, that I remembered and I saw it and it made an impression on me. So his friend told him, don't worry. Every bullet has its address. And I remember David emphasizing it in Yiddish. He was saying that every bullet has its address. That means if somebody is supposed to die, then he's going to die. And if somebody's going to live, he could be in the middle of the battlefield with bullets whizzing by, he's still going to live. We don't determine what's going to happen, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. And David HaMelech understands that he could see, Hashem can see, and even if we have bitaken, we can see a battlefield. And some people can see life. And David HaMelech was able to see that. So listen to the story. There was one fellow in the neighborhood, his name was Rabbi Avram Skrovnik. And Rabbi Avram Skrovnik was a cripple. And he was on his third floor apartment, unable to leave the apartment and had nobody to help him. And the bombing began one night in the city, and everyone in the building ran to the bunker. And Nebuch, they cried, what's Rabbi Avram going to do? Nobody could get him. They thought he has no chance of survival. But there was nothing they could do. He remained where he was, and the German warplanes bombarded the area. Well, the events did not unfold as they thought it would. When the bombs fell, the building was crushed. Except there was one stairwell that remained. And somehow, miraculously, the room where Rabbi Avram Skrovnik was sleeping, that room stood. It's impossible to imagine. You have an entire building. The building is destroyed. It makes no sense that the stairwell is standing. It makes no sense that the room is still standing on one little pillar. But it did, because every bullet has its address. And when you're able to see things with a vision, with faith, when you could see things like David HaMelech, then Rabbi Avram Skrovnik can live. Rabbi Avram Skrovnik survived that bombing. I don't think everybody else did. The people that looked at him with pity, little did they know that he would be the one that was one of the few survivors that survived the bombing. David HaMelech understands that. So no matter what situation you find yourself in, no matter what you feel your plight may be, have faith. Every bullet has its address, and in Yirtzeh Hashem, you will survive. In Mizmor Samach Vav, as we move on to the next kapitel, there are many opinions as to who wrote this kapitel. The Ibn Yichya and the Meiri say it was David HaMelech. Lamnatseach Shir Mizmor Hariu L'Elokim Kol Haaretz. The Ibn Ezra says one of the great Meshorerim, one of the great singers and composers in the Beis HaMikdash, he wrote it. And the Malbim says it was none other than Menashe ben Chizkiyahu. He was the author after he had his dramatic, incredible journey of tshuva. The second to last pasuk says, Ochein shama Elokim hikshiv bekol tfilasi. Hashem listens, even though our prayers are incomplete and our concentration in davening is sorely lacking, but Hashem still listens to the koil, and He always will listen to our tefillas. You know, there's a story. A fellow by the name of Mark. He walked into a synagogue. He didn't even know it was Yom Kippur, but something was pulling him. He was very, very upset. He walked into the synagogue. He was angry, he had a scowl on his face. People gathered there and they began putting on their talesim, their kitlach, and Mark was looking for someone. A few minutes later, the crowd began reciting Kol Nidre. He pulled out a cigarette. He starts to drag deeply on it, alleviating some of his frustration. The next morning he shows up again, still walking around the synagogue, still looking for someone. And he left in anger, couldn't find him. Obviously he's searching for someone. And people were looking around, they didn't know who he was, but he didn't look like he was in the mood of schmoozing with anybody. Finally the sun was setting, and this time Mark walks in again. And he looks one more time, and again he cannot find who he's looking for. So he walks right up to the Aron Kodesh. And when this happened, now he had everyone's attention. And he began to shout at God. And he said, I have a terrible life. My parents had a terrible life. And because of that, I've suffered greatly. And I'm angry as anything, God. Mark was broken and he cried uncontrollably. He stepped back. And suddenly, he was no longer angry. Someone approached Mark and he asked him what was going on. And he said, I'm a child of war survivors. My parents lost everything in the war, and to be honest with you, I had a very difficult upbringing. They were mad at God, and they took it out on me. And because of that, I left whatever traditions that I thought of keeping. And I thought, finally, it's time for me and God to have a word with each other. I came here during the week, I couldn't find him. I came here on Sabbath, I couldn't find him. Finally, somebody says, come on the Day of Atonement. So I came on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. I walked in last night, I didn't find him. I walked in today. I even walked in tonight, I couldn't find him. And then finally, I walked up to the ark. And as you heard, I gave God a piece of my mind. I could see how everybody was directing their thoughts at the ark, and I figured that's where I could find him. And as I stood for the first time in my life, face to face with the Almighty, all of a sudden, after I shouted, my anger went away. It seems like he accepted me, no matter what I said. After all these years, I found what I was looking for. Says David HaMelech, Ochein Shama Alekim Hikshiv B'Kol Tfilasi. You might think Hashem doesn't want to hear from you. You haven't been in his home in years. It's never too late. David HaMelech says Hashem is always willing to listen. He's always ready to hear your cry. Until next time, sei gesund.